fraud in the supply chain. How should the industry respond? We will hear from Rob REEB and David PASCO, and Matt REESE is our moderator. Virtual attendees, another reminder, you can drop your questions into the Q&A box. Thanks very much, and Matt, over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. As Jason mentioned, last panel for the day, and boy, I really feel like our property brokers are being left out of all this volatility and uncertainty. So let's bring them into the mix. This one is we thank you again to everybody here. So we see a lot of client faces here in the room. I know we've got hundreds of people online. This is a hot topic. And in fact, I think Dave called it a fireside chat because we could warm our hands by the flames of what's going on with fraud in the trucking industry right now. We're not going to spend too much time talking about the scope of the problem today. I think everybody knows it's a big problem, but I do want to start with some stats. We're going to get some perspectives here. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the gap or the disconnect between client expectations in this area and the reality for property brokers dealing with fraud. We're going to talk about why the standard maneuvers, the standard plays don't work in this scenario. And just so we don't leave you completely in the dark, we're going to talk about some actual solutions. And that's going to involve making yourself a harder target, upgrading your SOPs, and some risk management solutions. So today, we have with us two fantastic perspectives that we're going to hear from. We have Rob REEB, who's one of the preeminent attorneys in the transportation intermediary space. We have Mr. Dave PASCO, who is a longtime thought leader for risk management strategy, specifically for transportation intermediaries. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Good to be here.
And I'm going to throw a couple of stats at you, gentlemen, and then I'd like a perspective from both of you, both from the litigation and the risk management side of it. So this is from the TIA State of Fraud report that came out recently. I think we all know intuitively that fraud claims are up, but according to TIA members, fraud reports are now up 65% year over year. 83% of the TIA members have experienced 3 types of fraud in the last 6 months, with unlawful brokerage, aka criminals posing as legitimate brokers, being the most common scam. And 1/5, everybody's had losses to some degree, but 1/5 of those same TIA members have had losses in excess of $200,000 in the last 12 months. So growing problem. Rob, you described it as hot over the last 3 years and viral over the last year. Can you expand on that?
Well, with all credit to Lenny, I would call this fraud-demic. So there you go. Well, we've been handling transportation cargo claims, both for Roanoke and other clients for many years. And just from personal experience, I would say that 3 or 4 years ago, we had a handful of claims like this. And we went from a handful of claims to nearly, at one point, almost every claim that came in the office involved fraud of some kind in domestic brokerage. And to the extent that you could dedicate 1 or 2 lawyers in the firm to basically handling fraud claims. And so the volume is huge. We see it on a day-to-day basis just in terms of our practice. The case law is not catching up yet, but we know where it's headed because the cases are starting to come down. And that will inform some of the things we talk about later. Yeah. But unfortunately for the clients, these make the company types of cases, because if you haven't purchased the right coverages and you haven't been protecting yourself and you are not vetting in real time, these cases are often big. They're usually targeting high value lanes. The criminals are 5 steps ahead of the industry, and it's a very, very big problem.
Yeah, and I know obviously you've had to devote tremendous staff, resources, time to this just to handle the caseload. That's a great litigation perspective. Dave, you handle more property brokers than anybody. I know. You've got most of the top 10 in your profile. What are you seeing?
Well, unfortunately, I'm seeing the fact that it's harder for me to try to remember one of our assureds that this didn't happen to.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's happened to everyone at some point. There are some of these things that don't get reported because, quite honestly, how some of the fraud takes place is it's kind of embarrassing.
Mhm.
Okay, you've got measures put in place at your organization for carrier vetting, and people are bypassing those measures that you've put into place. So, I look at this as, not just something where, 2 years ago, we were talking about contingent auto, okay, being a business killer, okay, and how important it was to vet your carriers to make sure that you're not putting somebody dangerous on the road. Now, vetting your carriers, like you mentioned, has to be real time.
Mhm.
Okay. Gone are the days of collecting a insurance cert that is going to be, expires November 1st. Okay. You have to make sure that you are actually looking at that cert. Okay. Using your third party vendor. Okay. Who vets your carriers. And let's start there. You need to make sure that what you're paying for is what they're doing for you. Okay. Or even better, making sure that you set up your requirements with the third party vendor that best fit your internal programs. Because if you don't have an internal program for carrier vetting, how are you supposed to explain that to a third party about how you want to execute it?
And you're bringing up some terrific points, Dave. You're kind of hitting on the standard plays that haven't been working and kind of where we need to go from here to evolve from here. But before we do that, I want to pick up on something else that Rob, that you had mentioned earlier. You talked about the kind of the massive, and Dave, I know you see this on a daily basis, the massive disconnect,
Mhm.
right, between client expectation, the shipper expectations, the cargo owner's expectations, and the reality for the property brokers that are dealing with this type of fraud.
Yeah.
And something that you said that really kind of jumped out to me, talk about like going to a restaurant, right, where the food is bad, the portions are small, and the prices are really high. Unfortunately, it gets a little bit worse, right, because the standard protections that brokers tend to rely upon fall apart with this type of claim, with fraud claims. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's kind of twofold. Number one, I would say your typical customer is acquainted with and maybe expects what I'll call orthodox cargo loss. There's been a road accident, there's been an old-fashioned theft, like an unattended vehicle, there's been a shortage or something like this. They want to see that you're, as a broker, helping them get recovery from the motor carrier and so forth. But the typical problem we're seeing is our clients are brokers. They have brokered the load unwittingly to a entity posing as a legitimate motor carrier, and that fraudulent entity or that poser, that fraudster steals the stuff. The customer is very upset with that situation. That is not supposed to happen. And fundamentally, the problem for the broker is this is no longer a Carmack Amendment situation.
Right.
Under the Carmack Amendment, for those of you who are familiar with it, the Carmack Amendment governs the liability of motor carriers and freight forwarders. So brokers have no liability under Carmack for cargo loss and damage unless they contractually accept that. And we're always advising our clients not to do
Please
that,
don't.
of course, but it happens. However, in this situation, where I'm the broker and I've brokered to a fraudster, I didn't even complete my contract as a broker. I didn't broker this to a motor carrier. I gave it to a thief. So all these normal protections of I don't have liability for cargo loss and damage go out the window.
So your terms and conditions, your disclaimers in your
Not
contract.
necessarily that.
No? Okay.
No, that's not true.
All right.
Okay. But what is true is I can't just stand behind my normal defenses, my black letter law sort of defenses of I'm a broker. I don't have liability for cargo loss and damage, not my problem. The shipper, of course, is in no way going to see that as the answer. They're going to be, you never did it, you gave it to a thief. And the law has yet to really comment on this, but the cases are starting to roll in, and they're not good for brokers. Basically saying you're in fundamental breach of contract. Okay, so the problem is the broker that doesn't have a contract. So what is my contract as a broker? If I never have terms and conditions of service, if I don't try to form the same kind of relationship that we're urging our customs broker insureds and clients to do through terms and conditions, if I never have a contract that's in writing, what the court is going to impose on my client is basic brokerage. You were supposed to broker this to a motor carrier. You did not. You're in breach. Pay. Wow. That's the problem. So there's ever more the reason for brokers to get legal advice on adopting some form of contractual protection where you at least limit your liability, you attempt to disclaim liability for these types of losses and protect yourself contractually.
Okay, now we're getting to it. Now we're getting to the real solutions, because the typical stance is simply not going to serve you, and it's not going to serve the property.
You're going to be in trouble.
Right. So let's talk about how to make yourself a harder target. And the analogy, Dave, we were talking about earlier was like, if you think about like your own house, right? If there's somebody who's committed to getting into your house, to breaking in your house and stealing your stuff, they'll get in, right? The idea is to make yourself the least attractive target, right? You've got all the signs up, the fences, the dogs, whatever, and people are going to go, this is way too much trouble, and they're going to go someplace else. So really, you just don't want to be that soft target. You want to make yourself the hardest possible target to go after. And so let's talk about some strategies around there. Rob, you started touching on one about the terms and conditions. You maybe want to start there?
Well, I'll start there. Now those won't harden yourself against the fraudster.
Correct.
That will help give you at least something to fall back on, so that both you and your insurance company has ways to protect you against just paying claims, which of course will be a big problem on your renewals and the survival of your company, particularly for a small broker. The other way, and I think Dave will go further into this than I will, is the issue or the idea of static, or I'll call it chronological vetting. Okay, so the traditional way was I onboard a carrier, I vet them at that moment in time, I make sure they're good to go, and then I forget about them. Right? I'm not doing any active vetting, and that will not work in this environment. So there's a plus to this too. If we get into these systems that I think Dave will talk more about, which is active real-time vetting of carriers, it will help you also on the contingent auto exposure. Okay,
True.
so the more you are vetting a carrier to see, are they who they say they are, what's going on with this carrier, are there any problems? Well, that will probably have the side effect of keeping you from retaining motor carriers that might end up in a road accident. Okay,
right.
So there is that plus to it, but I'll kind of segue to Dave.
It turns out that some of these things that we're talking about, obviously the protections we're talking about aren't just specific to this, they're protecting your company in lots of ways. And that's a great segue, Dave, to talk about real-time vetting. How does that work?
Yeah. Before we get into real-time vetting, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about cyber coverage.
Yeah.
You talked about, being a least desirable,
Target. Yeah.
Okay. So,
Okay.
what your cyber policy is going to do requires you to have certain measures in place to help guard from things like phishing. Some of these fraudulent claims start out with somebody sending you an email that has been altered.
Or the motor carrier.
Okay.
Or the motor carrier, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So, having that policy in place is going to make you less desirable. Okay. Now, moving on to carrier vetting, once again, knowing what is happening in the industry, on a day-to-day basis. This is not set it and forget it, okay? If you're not using your most, one of your most tech-savvy guys that you have in the bullpen, running this in a policy that you have put together, okay, you're gonna come up short, because I've seen cases of where you get a report back from the third party and it's like, well, this really doesn't tell you a whole lot, okay? And that was because it wasn't set up properly. Okay, so there was a disconnect between, the guy running the place and what he actually wants his people to do. And he's paying money for this third party and he's not getting the bang for the buck that he needs to. Okay. One of the things that I see in claims all the time is shortcuts. Okay, you've got a third party vetting process in place, but you know what? Today, we're not going to use that.
Yep.
Okay.
Bypass.
You've got
bypass.
terrific locks on the door, but nobody locked the doors.
Yeah.
Just like any other safety precaution.
Any other safety precaution, and 9 times out of 10, it's probably either going to happen on a holiday weekend or a weekend because you have to move a load for a customer. Okay. I used to be in transportation. I used to make calls to Best Buy saying, we're not going to move your load over a holiday weekend because none of my regular carriers are available. Okay. But we can move it Monday. We're going to put a team on it. Okay. And we're going to get it there and it's going to get there in one piece. So, this whole fraud thing, this thing that we're involved in, this fraudemic, everybody has to get involved in the solution.
Yeah.
The shippers have to be involved, brokers have to be involved, the truckers have to be involved, everyone in your offices have to be, involved. I was talking to Karen about, when is a good time to, revamp or take a fresh look at your processes. Every time Apple sends you an update for your phone, well, guess what? That's a great reminder that, hey, look, I need to talk to Bob, who's running the program internally, and, how are we doing with this? What kind of reports are you getting from, the third-party vetting, okay, about, hits, carriers that you shouldn't be using? And by the way, getting back to cyber, a good cyber producer is also going to be giving you reports about how many times your business has been attacked.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right.
So it's a holistic approach with a lot of different things going on. Cyber, E&O, contingent cargo,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, there could be a time of where even all of that doesn't work because there is no substitute for common sense.
Correct.
Mhm.
Well, before we get to some of those, what do we do when all else fails?
Mhm.
And we do have some things we're going to talk about with that, but I want to pick up on a couple of things that you said, Dave. One was, and Rob, about the cyber. I think we've had this conversation. The important thing about having the cyber liability coverage, in addition to covering the normal things, data breaches, stuff like that, right? When it relates to this, the point is that most insurance companies these days will not give you a policy, as you said, unless you can demonstrate that you've done certain things internally in terms of SOPs around cyber protection.
Exactly.
So it's really kind of like the protections that you're forced to put into place before you can get the insurance coverage, then the insurance coverage itself. Cyber liability, some people think that, well, it was a phishing related scam, so I should be able to get a check for this $1 million stolen load. That's not going to happen. It's really less about the cyber insurance in that instance. It's really more about the cyber investment that people are making. And you clearly have to be making significant investments into protecting your systems, making sure people are following those processes and procedures. And ironically, I know ChatGPT has gotten an AI has gotten a really bad reputation today with that. I'm not going to say it's any better in this arena, but a lot of the APIs that are out there that are doing real-time vetting and checking like that, they're using algorithms, AI, if you will, but they're using algorithms to identify patterns or bad actors who show up time and time again, or methodologies that show up time and time again. So there's a real benefit, as you've said, to having that real-time vetting, to making those investments around your cyber infrastructure, right? Making yourself a harder target to hit. And those are all, I can imagine, Rob, all things that are coming into play when it all still goes wrong.
Right, and I'm thinking of what Cindy was talking earlier about, being a prudent manager of your business, and I think Lenny said counseling the business. So when we talk about cyber, a mature, responsible business should have cyber coverage. I would tell my clients if they ask me what kind of coverages I should have, I'm just giving general advice. I think it's very prudent for you to do that for all the reasons Dave mentioned, and the side effect of helping to harden the target. Hopefully, it will not cover a loss like we're describing. Let's be clear about that. So we're not saying that cyber is the solution to this. But we have to, as an industry, view every single shipment like a banking transaction. Yep. Or when you're looking at your email and you see something suspicious, now we're all being alerted and trained internally in our companies because we have cyber coverage about phishing and the danger. You're just one email away from sending that wire transfer to a fraudster, right? So, for instance, in my firm, we no longer ever share any kind of payment information about a case, about a receivable, about a settlement by email. Everything is either on a Teams meeting or some other secure form of communication, because we have to assume every single transaction is potentially going to be penetrated by a fraudster. Right. And I think until the industry gets there, this thing won't get under control. It's still kind of a cowboy environment at many levels, particularly in the smaller broker environment, where everything's going to be fine. It won't be fine. The thieves have targeted this industry. They've realized it's a target-rich environment, and they're after this market. So we've got to do everything to fight that at every level.
Yes.
That's kind of the message. So.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, as we've seen from the TIA membership, you're going to get affected at some point. This really is falling into the when it happens, not if it's going to happen, right? So a long enough time period, everybody's going to get affected. Hopefully it's going to be relatively small, but as we've seen, 22% of the members have had significant six-figure losses in the last 12 months. So we know this isn't going away. We know the problem is getting bigger. Let's talk about some other potential avenues for companies to protect themselves. E&O. I'm going to start with Rob, one of your favorite topics, and then we're going to get a follow-up from Dave, who sees that in the trenches.
Right. So the kind of conventional contingent motor truck cargo coverage is not designed or meant to cover this type of situation we're talking about. The reason for that is that coverage is supposed to be designed for covering a loss where you've brokered to an actual motor carrier and there's been a loss to cargo and the motor carrier hasn't responded for one reason or another, and now you have a backup plan through this coverage. It is not designed for when you didn't even ever, because then there's a subrogation potential, there's potential for recovery.
Right.
We'll call that kind of the orthodox standard brokerage.
Just a reminder, no subrogation in these events.
There is no subrogation against a fraudster.
Right.
So when we have, as a broker, managed through one way or the other for the load to get delivered to the wrong party altogether, that is not a party in the transportation chain, but a criminal, that coverage is provided under the E&O. And so it's very important for a property broker to purchase both types of coverage so that you're not left without protection. And that way the E&O can respond to that claim because you have made an error. You've not given this to a motor carrier. And if you have those kinds of protections contractually that we talked about, then the E&O insurance can help protect you from those claims with those legal protections.
And let's go back to your comment, Rob, about the fact that the clients, the disconnect, right, of expectations. The clients are not going to give you the grace that they give you in the event of a normal, the truck turned over, the cargo's damaged. You have disappeared my cargo to some Estonian cyber gang. The clients are going to be angry. Temperatures are going to be flaring. The chance of an E&O probably going up high.
Very
right?
high. Plus, typically you would be referring them to the motor carrier, or make your claim to the motor carrier. They'll respond in due course, and hopefully they will. Here, where are you going to send them?
Right.
So,
And Dave, I know you've got absolutely no opinion at all about E&O. So,
Well, you said it very well.
thank you.
We could talk first about, limits.
Yeah,
Okay.
great. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because, making sure, everything's, in the pandemic really put a stamp on this, okay, about what is really being, moved out there in the world of transportation. Making sure that you have, enough limits on board for what you're moving. Okay. But let's reel this all the way back. I think everybody needs to have conversations with their customers so that you know what your customers' expectations are when this happens. Okay. When I was in transportation, my partners always used to, they'd bring me along to talk to a customer because I was the insurance guy. And they'd say, don't talk about claims. Okay. So we get an agreement signed, and I'd say, okay, this is great. Now let's talk about when things go wrong, because eventually things will go wrong if you move enough stuff, right? And having everybody on board with, I'm okay with your terms and conditions because I'm getting preferable rates. That's normally what happens.
Mhm.
Okay. Using terms and conditions, in an ironclad situation, you need to have the intestinal fortitude to stand behind those if that is what your game plan is. Okay. So there's a lot of different ways of doing this. One of them, is making sure that you've got the proper coverages, the contingent cargo, errors and omissions, when something happens. And making sure that the errors and omissions are of the proper limit.
Yep, that's a great point. And you've kind of led into the last two tools, if you will, in the toolkit when it comes to your risk management strategies around that. Cargo legal liability. Let's talk a little bit about that. Is that going to help me? Is that going to respond correctly in this scenario?
Well, as a broker, I should be having contingent motor truck cargo,
Right.
because theoretically I'm only acting as a broker, so I don't need the kind of cargo cover, say a freight forwarder would have or a motor carrier would have. So I'd say that's still very much an essential coverage for what a property broker's core business is, but that's insufficient in this environment. I'd say perhaps 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't as important for a property broker. Now, I would argue it is as essential as their contingent auto coverages to protect the integrity of their business. Dave said something interesting. He said, you have to have, I think you said, the intestinal fortitude to stand behind your terms and conditions. Okay. There's been a lot of talk today of terms and conditions, both in this context and customs broker context. In my experience, the international forwarding community, the international customs brokering community is much better about the adoption of terms and conditions through all of the standard forms that the association provides. And it's an expectation in that industry that there will be such conditions. The property brokers have been way behind on this because they believe predominantly that it will hurt sales. And they're very concerned about advancing terms on a domestic level. I would urge the community to get past that the industry needs to get to a point where it is expected there will be terms and conditions of service, that brokers are not accepting 100% liability. They may do so on a contract by contract basis, which you need to vet with your insurance company, right? But as a standard measure, the industry needs to get to a point where, and I'm just urging this upon the industry, where there are standard terms and conditions. And then when you have them and you have a situation that you enforce them. The problem obviously is when you have that major customer.
Right.
And,
Right.
then we've all been in this situation. I can't I can't enforce them because I'll lose this client. That won't be the perspective of your insurance company. Okay. If you have enforceable terms and conditions, you bought insurance to defend your legal liability, you can expect that those will be employed on your behalf in a liability insurance situation. So there's some definite tension there between business needs and some of the stuff we're talking about.
So let's
So-
talk about a
Yeah.
potential solution
Yeah.
that maybe won't impact your relationship with your client and will pay the claim. Cargo insurance. Dave?
There we go. Okay.
Cargo insurance, shipper's interest cover, same thing. So the difference there is it's not dependent upon the carrier's insurance for participation or settlement or anything for that matter. This is a first dollar defense. It's primary coverage. It's as a broker or a freight forwarder, I like to describe it as you have two buckets. Okay, you get a liability bucket and you have a shipper's interest bucket. Okay, anything that is in the shipper's interest bucket won't touch the liability bucket. Two separate things. Okay, the shipper's interest can perform in a lot of ways that your contingent motor truck cargo won't. Mainly with exclusions. Okay, because a lot of contingent motor truck cargo policies are going to follow the follow the exclusions of the motor carrier.
Right.
Okay, so far better coverage. You want to talk about saving relationships with your customers. It's probably the most cost-effective insurance on the planet, dollar to dollar. And I know for a fact that everybody likes, to go into someone's office and know that, they've just been wired the transaction to settle a claim. It's a beautiful thing.
That's a beautiful thing. And, in the scenarios you pointed out where you have this ugly claim, big
Yep.
client, everybody's upset
Everybody's upset.
because it's, some fraudulent trucker with fake credentials has picked this up. It's disappeared into ether. You're never going to get it back. There's no subrogation. You can't even see it. It's gone. It's already been probably exported out of the country. Cargo insurance will cover the claim. They don't care how it happened, just that it happened. Very cheap, very reasonable. And this is a great investment for property brokers to offer to facilitate that arrangement of that cargo insurance with their clients. I think that might have taken us to our time. Got a couple minutes left. Okay, a couple minutes left before we get into questions. Here's what I want to give the scenario for each of you. Couple minutes apiece. Rob, brand new property broker comes to you. Help me set myself up. What advice are you giving them around, terms and conditions, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, we would roll out a standard set of terms and conditions as a property broker and adopt them in the way you heard earlier, which is through typically most of them don't get a credit app, but we try to do a credit app. We definitely put it on all their emails. We have a link directly to the website. It's on the website. It's on all of their invoices with a direct live link. Every place we can put it, we put it. That is step number one. Get yourself protection through terms and conditions of service. Then, of course, we'll look at their whole suite of insurance. The third step is always to make sure, particularly in the case of a smaller, closely held broker, is that they have competent corporate counsel on their team to make sure they have formed their corporation and are maintaining their corporation properly. Because when all these other things fail, if that nuclear case comes along, they want to be sure they've protected their personal assets properly. This is their lifetime investment. Have they been doing it right, or have they been, using somebody from down the street who's, isn't sophisticated enough to put this together properly. And then the last thing I always advise is proper estate planning for that same type of business owner. You need to have all these things together. So that's your belt and suspenders approach.
I love it. And we talked a little bit about that suite of insurance coverages. Just a reminder, when it comes to the E&O, which is designed to protect the assets of the company, the property broker, turns out if your clients get a check through cargo insurance, turns out their desire to sue you typically goes away.
Well,
So,
yeah, I mean, you do have this is just something to kick around is any given customer. Some customers already have an open cargo policy in place and it might be a hard sell.
True.
Okay, there is that factor, but not all of them do, particularly on the domestic market as opposed to the importers. So.
All right. Great stuff. Thank you, gentlemen. Jason, are we opening it up to questions?
Yes, we are. Excellent presentation, guys. Thank you so much.
All right. Fantastic.
Kylie, what do we got?
We actually have quite a few questions coming through online.
I am
was trying
not
to balance
surprised.
them. First, I want to open it up to the room. Does anyone here in the room have a question that they want to ask? Okay, so I'm going to start with this one here. We talked a lot about terms and conditions, but this one asks, where can I find standard terms and conditions for our property brokerage?
I'm going to turn that to Rob.
You have to hire your lawyer to get them to you. Yeah. Yes, there isn't, I don't believe the TIA has, unlike the NCBFA, they don't have a standard set of, they have some standard contracts I'm aware of, broker carrier agreement, shipper broker agreement, but I've not seen that they have recommended
do not.
terms and conditions of service, which are really a stepchild of what's going on in the international side. That's really what spawned these terms and conditions, and the case law that supports them comes from that same line. So transportation attorneys should be retained. I'm not saying it's me. I'm just saying that you should for sure. Yeah.
And don't sell a transportation attorney short. There's more than just terms and conditions that you need to be, examining. One for new guys, okay? And I still come across guys that, before the ICC was dissolved, that are working off of, terms and conditions for covered wagons. So making sure that,
Sure they're up to date.
yes, everything's up to date.
That's
You
great.
don't want to just write them nilly-willy, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, this next one says, technology is a common accomplice to fraud, but you discussed vetting as a way that technology can be used to prevent and detect fraud. Can you share some of the names of some third-party vetting services, as well as any other ways that technology can prevent fraud? Maybe websites or
Pass
subscriptions.
that to Dave.
I'm going to use the Cindy DeLeon. While we deal with a lot of different organizations.
Providers.
Okay, yeah, providers. Okay, we can't, comment on one being better than the next. But I'm sure if you talk to your licensed insurance professional, they may be able to help. Yeah.
I would
And there-
say also, I'm sorry,
No, please.
that an AI search of vendors who do this with enough detail, I think would probably produce or render a decent list.
Using technology.
And
technology.
these emerging technologies to fight this are constantly evolving to try to keep up with what the fraudsters are doing.
And
Yeah,
I was just going to add on to that. As you're looking at your technology provider in this space, really, and I don't want to get too geeky here, but really having an API where they're connected to that provider
yes.
and are getting that vetting, as Dave said, real time right now before this load goes out.
Yep.
That's as fresh as it's going to get. If you get a green from your provider on that, not saying bad things couldn't happen, but you're significantly less likely to have something happen.
Right.
That's the only way this really works.
Just the only way.
It has to be live.
Yeah.
Excellent. The next one we have says, can you talk about any I can never say this word, legislation measures to help control the rise in fraud in the supply chain?
What, wait a minute. Are you saying the government might step up and do something here?
There's actually,
Yeah, I know that the FMCSA has been attempting to harden the access to its sites and the ability of fraudsters to pose as motor carriers but what they've not been able to do, and I think it's a matter of resources. If you think of what's going on at the FAA and other places in terms of technology. In fact, I was surprised to hear how on top of things, the customs service is, which is great. But the technology to actively fight this fraud is not, I don't think it's a legislative question. I think it's more of a, what's the regulator going to do? Can they help the industry actively protect against fraudulent use of DOT authority, MC numbers, all of that? And the solution just isn't there yet. I know they're looking at it, but maybe you've got some other information.
yeah, being around a while,
Yeah.
I want to harken back to map 21,
Yep.
and illegal brokering. When was the last time you heard about somebody being brought up for illegal brokering?
Yeah, that was the legislative response. There's been very little activity on map 21. It did form a form of scaring of by raising the bond level. That helped a lot, but it's having nothing to do with this problem. It's not helping at all.
Just like, customs brokers and the CBP expecting customs brokers to police your own industry. It's the same thing with, attorneys, insurance people, and property brokers.
Yeah. This is definitely one of those, the Lord helps those who help themselves, because if you're waiting for the government to solve this problem, you might be waiting a long time.
Yeah.